How are y'all doing today? These folks are kind of trickling in today. So we'll give folks a moment to get here, but good to see y'all so far. Yeah, well, folks will trickle in. Who know? Life is very lifey. Got lots of kind of messages of, oh, I can't make it today. We'll watch afterwards. So we'll see how many folks we are in person. But definitely want to, kind of dive into these things with us while we can. And we'll go ahead and get started and we'll integrate folks as they arrive. And yeah, to kind of dive right in, I'm Lacey. I'm the trainer for today. And before we get rolling, big thank you to Canada Council for the Arts, whose support is making this series possible. And I'm super happy to work with ACCA to put this series into action. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here with all of you. And a couple of things kind of off the top before we start. I want to make sure to acknowledge that I am joining from the traditional and stolen lands territory of the Ganawage folks, traditionally Mohawk. Site for gathering and joining and sharing together, and want to really recognize the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples on the land in which I live and that likely all of us are living. And yeah, so just always want to kind of name and recognize that at the start. And I think those are most of the starter notes. One other thing I wanted to make sure to not forget, so I'm going to just do it now before I lose track of it. I have been asked to encourage folks to like the YouTube channel and links on which I had up, and I might have to redig it out somehow. I think I might have closed that screen accidentally. Oh no, here we go, just because it helps get traction there and helps with getting continued funding for things like this. So I'm pasting that in the chat box. And yeah, we're going to dive right in today. This is the sixth of the six series. And one of the things we're going to do today that is a little bit different than some of the ones before, and I'll pop into share screen so you can see this for a second. That's the YouTube page. Is that we're going to look a little bit at kind of a case study that involves you and kind of consultants who are on the call. And these live trainings are open to anyone. So it is possible that there are folks here who aren't an ACCA consultant, but I think through recognizing most of y'all's names that you all are. And what I want to do is kind of, throughout this series, we've been looking at like, okay, how do we both like understand what's out there, but also move through kind of this like continually developing digital landscape and make sure that we're evaluating like, what do I actually need? And how do I know if this is the right tool for us? And how do we implement this effectively? And what does this look like? And so I want to put some of this into action with us here. And specifically, kind of what we want to talk about is in conversations, both with kind of lead ACCA folks and among many consultants, things have come up around like, how can we as a network, share more resources and knowledge? Like, what are the ways to connect outside of, emails and texts and these kinds of things? What are the ways to facilitate and create kind of networking possibilities? And is there potentially a digital tool that would enable folks to have more connectivity, more sharing, et cetera, and to kind of weigh through some of those variables and to talk with the folks who are here live about like, yeah, what would you want and what would that look like? And for us to kind of collectively also go through this process of, taking a question like this and really looking at and pulling apart what maybe is the right answer here. Like, what are the pathways that we could potentially seek this information and how this process we can kind of then take into our own respective lives. Um, Also, as usual, all the normal things. If you have questions, feel free to ask them anytime. You can unmute, you can type in the chat box, all of those bits. And yeah, but this is where we're going to start today. And so I want to talk about this piece a little bit, right? So this world that I think many of us run into, both maybe in our individual, just like our own work spaces of like, okay, what tools could or should I be using for my own processes to make them more efficient, more productive, et cetera. And with the folks that I'm collaborating with, what are they using? What could they be using? What does that look like? Okay. And so kind of this will sort of like hit some of the review of the previous trainings through this process. And in case you weren't at those, the link that I pasted in the chat box, you can access all of them there. And so kind of going into this with this idea of like, okay, we're considering adding something in. What does that look like? I think about two big pathways. Like, one is if we know exactly what we want and are just looking for the tool that offers it, like we know, okay, what is it that we need? What does that look like? What are all the kind of realities there? And the second pathway is like, okay, there's an idea of what might be possible, but a lot to potentially learn and explore about what would fit, what would actually serve the group of people involved. Okay. And so with this kind of this second pathway of like, okay, yeah, how do we like figure out what possibilities might be there? We want to look at like, how do we gather data without immediate elimination? How do we start broad, start more general, kind of aim for an understanding of kind of the lay of the land and the situation that both tools that might be available, but also what are the needs that we have and what does that kind of look like? And so I want to take a moment and just kind of like, as if we are, kind of folks on a shared team, exploring this possibility of, hey, is there a digital tool that we could integrate among ACCA folks that could facilitate connections, linking, sharing resources, et cetera, like what that might look like? And the first thing I want to do to just sort of get conversation rolling, I'm going to open a whiteboard and uh, ensure that you can write on it and let me know if anyone's having problems with that. And you can just draw on this front page as you're kind of confirming that you have access to whiteboard adding. And if you don't see that, if you're on a computer looking for options or view options, you might see annotate there. If you're on an iPhone, iPad situation, you probably have like a pencil in the corner. And let me know if anyone's having an issue with that. But it looks like some okays coming through. And you can also add chat, not working for you. Jenny, what kind of device are you on? You on a phone or a computer of some sort? You can try to troubleshoot that. And worst case, you can always write stuff in the chat box as well. So yeah, let me know if you want help kind of troubleshooting that. I'm going to open a new page on the whiteboard, and I'm curious for us to kind of add. Oh, it is okay. Gotcha. For us to add, like, if you think about like what would be ideal in an ACCA collaborative space or a digital tool, what kinds of things would you like to see come out of that, or like what kinds of things would you like to be able to do in that idea of collaboration? Like, what would that be? What do you imagine? Yeah, WhatsApp group chats. Yeah, and it can be specific tools. It can be kind of ideas of like, sharing documents, networking, like anything at all. And feel free to add as many things as come to mind. I'll give folks a moment to add things onto the board. Mhm. Yeah, WhatsApp group chats, online survey service. For other folks, are there things that would be nice to have to kind of continue sharing or exchanging information with one another? Give folks a moment. I know we're a really small group today, too. Lots of folks are going to be watching later. So it's a little harder to generate things. I'm out of whiteboard for a minute, but I'm curious, yeah, what does come up for folks? Thoughts, feelings around having a tool or an access to something that would enable like information sharing in different ways or chatting or connecting. Yeah, Jenny, I see your virtual hand.
Yeah. Hi there, everybody. I put up the WhatsApp groups
Mhm.
because it's very interesting to me. I mean, most of us, I think that I know, use it socially.
Mhm.
However, what's interesting to me is that in developing nations, it's used intentionally for business. And I have a daughter in Panama, for example, and all her interactions with everything from contractors to clients to everybody, it's all done through WhatsApp. They essentially email. She never goes on email anymore. And I
Mhm.
find that really interesting because, as you know, developing nations have often leapt ahead of us in a lot of tools and a lot of digital usage. So I just wonder whether you're, Lacey, are seeing this increasingly happening for business here?
hmm hmm Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so it is a really interesting thing. Like I think the different ways that kind of various like patterns and tools happen. Like I definitely feel like overall there's much more significant like WhatsApp usage in general, but I also think like there's a lot more like overall tools and resources coming in outside of email that like offer texting like communication, where there's a way to sort of, send short messages of some kind, but that are used also slightly differently than just like phone texting or a typical kind of like phone text group. And I think here I'm seeing a lot of integration of other tools like Discord and oh my goodness, my brain is blanking, Slack and some of the other ones that we'll talk about today. I think one of the things that's really interesting about WhatsApp as well is that it allows folks with phones from all over the place to connect in a way that isn't always as easy, and to like have a shared platform that is also like Wi-Fi usable to do some of the like normal texting and beyond things that wouldn't be as easy if we like, had phones from different countries or had different Wi-Fi plans and things as well. Yeah, I'm curious, Roger, if you have thoughts on that as well, or if they're
Yes.
yeah.
And I would concur with what Jenny's just raised about how Canada is specifically very email, Slack. I hear that a lot. But if as soon as you leave,
Mhm,
there's an entire other universe of ways people are communicating. And though, and so the example that Jenny gave, I have a similar example where working with organizations in North Africa, Middle East, where we were doing a pitch on Zoom. We're doing a Zoom, it was Teams or Zoom pitch. And the team that was doing the pitch used as a back channel WhatsApp. And I had
mhm,
familiarity with it. And I was sort of, okay, so this is on my phone now. And, and I sort of signed in and we sort of gave each other little messages as to, okay, so you've gone this far in the pitch. You want to pick up that piece there? We didn't talk about it yet. That kind of thing. But I was really unfamiliar and felt kind of a little disconnected there. So yes,
mhm,
additional knowledge of those kinds of things, it would be fun to have. But we may increasingly need this if this starts to spread elsewhere, because we don't know which. And so this notion that ACCA as an organization would know who's familiar with this, who can talk to you for 15 minutes and say, here's what you got to know.
mhm.
And I'd say that the ability to get from another human being some feedback, for me, is always more instructive than
Totally.
a lot of the online tools. So yeah, that would be an interesting opportunity, I think, for ACCA and for the networking and sharing amongst the ACC membership to occur.
Mhm. Totally. Yes. Absolutely. Yes, that makes complete sense. And I think also I'll add, like, I think very much, yes, like WhatsApp. I mean, I think people here are using WhatsApp, especially as folks are doing more traveling and like, it's like I use it. Initially, I only used it with my friends who were living in different countries and we had phone plans that wouldn't, easily text one another. But now it's a lot more common that I use it with folks. And I think one of the things that is unique about WhatsApp over traditional texting, which depends obviously like on what your kind of phone and carrier is, but you can also have like I have WhatsApp on my desktop as well. And so I can, type a text message and see text come in on my computer, which is a lot easier in a setting where maybe I'm needing to kind of keep up with communication while simultaneously doing something else on my computer versus having to like look at my phone versus other things. And one of the things that's been also, I think, interesting with WhatsApp, do people in here use WhatsApp? Or is anyone else using WhatsApp in here? Yes, Jenny is. Yeah. Jenny, do you all the time, do you use any of the community features?
No, I don't, but I do use the group features. Like we have a whole load of different groups that um, The only challenge there is it's a bit like email reply to all.
Mhm.
If you, depending on the
Mhm.
size of the group, you can have endless dings as endless messages keep coming in as everybody puts an emoji up there or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, because I do think that yes, like certain things of the like reply all where it's like, okay, you can get inundated with like the messages and it can be sort of more of the traditional like chat, we're all in a text thread reality. I do think with the groups situations, like the new community feature, that there are some ways to like more like clearly direct messaging where it's like I can put the like, at Jenny and then it's like you get that ding versus everyone else. Um, but it is definitely can be, I think, limited in those ways. But we'll talk today too about some of the other tools that are kind of becoming more and more popular. Does anyone use Discord, for example? Is anybody on that? No, yeah. It's an interesting one. We'll sort of yes, we'll talk about these different things because today it's like I want to both talk about like, yeah, what is it that we do want in that might be useful for us, and to kind of look at different tools and to sort of like reflect simultaneously on the process of like, what's it like to even think about this process and to figure this out. And yeah, kids do totally. Um, and Discord, it's an interesting one where it is, I feel like, also kind of in this digital world, like really morphing and changing how people are using it and who's using it. Because originally it was very much designed to be a like gaming platform where it's like folks who are, gaming together and logged onto something may be having their Discord channels, which are sort of like your chat rooms essentially, or your like forum pages for their group. And it could be, a small cluster of people of like, oh, this is my three friends that I've invited here. Or it can be, I love X video game, massive channel that everyone can join into. Yeah, and Kathy, totally. The like, yeah, too many messages and doesn't work well for me. And I think this is an interesting thing, right? Like when we look at these various tools and kind of what some of these options are. I want to open, let me go back into PowerPoint mode here for a second and share my screen. Um, yeah, to kind of go through this process together. So when I think about, oops, that was not the right screen. Hold down. Constant text stuff. Okay. Cool. So, yeah, when I'm thinking about kind of this idea, and this I think touches on what Roger had said about like how do we gather data about what might work, what the possibilities are? And one great way is like learning from those who may have insight. So, like, who's in the room or who do I know that has information? Uh, Ideating. So, like, yeah, what specific features come to mind? It sounds like general sharing, general networking, being able to pitch a question to other consultants saying, "Hey, is anybody using this tool? Can I have 15 minutes of your time and we have a virtual coffee?" Or, "Hey, this new company I'm working with is using whatever tool. Can anyone give me the run through on this?" Um, and I think to me, one of the important pieces that I'm always thinking about, in addition to kind of these factors of like, how are we using this and like what's going to make it usable or not usable, and right, like the note that Kathy made about like, yeah, if there's a billion messages coming in, maybe that's overwhelming, but then how do we, find something that has that balance, and looking at like those questions, and also like what is the outcome or the goal of this tool, like not necessarily only like what are the features that let it happen, although that's important too, but like what would unfold, like what would it look like to have this in place, like how would we know if it's working. Yeah. um, and so kind of with that, like I want to look at sort of doing some of this process together. And it sounds like there's, yeah, different thoughts and different wonderings. And I think, what Jenny brought up is really interesting in terms of both like, WhatsApp as a tool and an idea, and also this larger question of like, oh yeah, what are people doing in both different countries, but also outside of our circles and our realms, in the same way that we've talked about in some of the previous weeks, like having younger folks sometimes come into the office space who, use something that maybe you haven't even heard of. And like, what does that kind of potentially bring? And yeah, so those thoughts. I'm curious, like for other folks, like as we even think about like talking about like, oh yeah, what would be good to have or most useful? Are there other thoughts that come up kind of just right away in thinking about that? Whether that's excitement, trepidation, ambivalence, curiosities, ideas, anything welcome. Yeah, Jenny, go for it.
Somebody had written on the whiteboard about surveys, and I
Hmm.
just wanted some clarity on what the intent of that was, whether they were looking for, whether the suggestion was ACCA would have host some survey, like a Survey Monkey membership that we would all buy into. I wasn't clear what that was intended to be. So
Yeah, thank you for coming back to that. I actually wasn't either, but I'd lost track of that in my brain. Yeah, Roger, was that you who added it?
Yes, yes. So in the same way that I interact with different teams I work with, I'm just wondering if I can interact with my fellow consultants at ACCA. And so the anecdote I have about that is that about a year ago, I was on a government project where I wanted to survey persons that had taken advantage of a particular government program. And the government people I was speaking to said, no, you can't find out who these people are because it's a program that's aimed at young people and we can't give out any information on them. And so you
Hmm.
can't survey them. And I thought about this for a while. And as I was drawing to the end of the contract, at one point I figured, well, what if I did an anonymous online survey where I
Hmm.
wasn't getting any information from them and I didn't contact them, but the
Hmm.
organizations that they had access to the program through, who know who they are and have already a relationship, could contact them. And so I thought about it, I said, a quick survey monkey, perhaps 8 to 10 questions. And so thinking about this, I said, well, in the amount of time it would take me to figure out how to use SurveyMonkey and learn from myself, because I am a slow learner. So what I did is I contacted a young person who was working with the another group of consultants. And so I asked him, can you put together a survey monkey for me? He said, oh yeah, sure. No problem. I said, 8 to 10 questions. He said, okay, how long would it take you? And he said, oh, probably maybe an hour. And I said, okay, well, tell you what, I'll pay you a half day. Okay. And off he went with it. I gave him the questions. In both languages, he set up the Survey Monkey, and then we sent this little Survey Monkey link to all the organizations that had young people, and we got a great response.
Hmm.
Well, I turned that around in less than a day and was able to sit it into the contract before the end of the contract. And whereas learning this might have taken me forever. But then I thought to myself, what if I had sent a message to my colleagues at ACCA? Is there anybody who can do me a quick survey?
Hmm.
That have had the same effect. And so I'm not sure if ACCA is structured to do that, but is that a service that they could offer? Um,
Hmm.
and then I flipped that back to myself and I said, well, if I was in the same situation, what service could I offer? And so,
Hmm.
well, maybe in certain cases, there would be situations where someone would require someone who spoke French or did a process that was able to be done in French and in English or that kind of thing, or could run a process with a group. And so, all the kinds of things I could
Hmm.
put out there that I would be able to do if someone required it. And would it help them to secure a contract or to complete a contract or to get a broader breadth of feedback on a particular process they were doing? So
Hmm.
in that creation of a sort of a marketplace where we can talk about what we can potentially share.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, Jenny, I've got thoughts on that, but I'm wondering, Jenny, are your thoughts on that or a different one? Because if it's on this, you can go ahead and jump in too. Cool. Go for it. No, no, no. No, please. We're a small group, so please.
be aligned with what Roger is saying. I think what it speaks to, though, again, goes back to the communication amongst our membership, because we don't have a simple communication method. We don't have
Mhm.
a WhatsApp group, for example.
Mhm.
So I think the only way you could, right now, the only way that could function, and I think Jennifer's on the line, she may be able to correct me,
Mhm.
is literally you'd have to sort of put something in the RFP section, or, because we don't, or literally cut and paste everybody's email address from the website. And so,
Mhm.
like we don't have an instant group communication function as far as I'm aware right now. But that would be fantastic for exactly that
Mhm.
kind of reason. When you want a quick turnaround, you don't want to have to write up something lengthy and post it and wait for people to go online. Yeah. Thank you.
Totally.
And there has been
Totally.
talk about that, but we just don't. We haven't figured it out, and we have limited resources.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's definitely something that's been is being discussed.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, and it's an interesting thing because I think it is like, we are kind of right now sort of the like, potential sort of think tank of getting some of this like rolling and figuring out like what are the options and what is actually also going to work for people, right? Because we don't want necessarily something where it's like, okay, there's this new thing, but there is like nobody's actually using it, or there's a billion messages coming in, so I never access it, or like we want to find that balance for sure. Yeah, Ginny, I'm not sure if your hand re-raised or if it was still up from before. I didn't. No, no, no. Please.
Response to Jennifer, because I think this is a really important conversation, which I'm sure the board is having, as you say, Jennifer. But there are free tools. This is
Mhm.
not
Totally.
complicated. It's just a matter of asking people if they want to opt in or out. I mean, I don't think this is a deal breaker for the organization. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, the timing on this discussion is very good because we're having a board meeting tomorrow to discuss plans for 2023, 2024. So this is certainly something that I will carry forward as, something that we really should look into and follow through on.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, and we'll keep kind of brainstorming. Yeah, different possibilities and ideas about like what is going to work best, because I think it does really vary based on every organization. And even within an organization, individuals will have things that they prefer or that work better for certain folks and not others. And, I think there's like a full range of possibilities, all the way from, okay, we could have a Google group where it's like, you just put everyone's emails in a Google group. And then there is the ACCA at Google gmail.com that anyone can just email ACCA at gmail.com and it goes to everyone. But that can end up sometimes being excessive emails and things. But there's, I think lots of possibilities here. And kind of with this, sort of this parallel of like, yeah, we're exploring this and kind of within this context too of like the things that we've looked at and like, how do we evaluate these? And so as I think about this, like as this was kind of brought up to me of like, oh yeah, we've been talking about like what might work and kind of Jennifer and Victoria and sort of looking at like, oh yeah, we've talked about these different possibilities and what might work. My brain starts kind of churning like, okay, is that a Discord? Is that Slack? Like, what other tools could be available that would be, usable, accessible, cheap to free, um, and actually serve the function that we want? And so for me, kind of in that process of like, okay, where do we start that information gathering? Kind of as we've talked about, like these types of questions, I often start with AI of asking sort of the simplified questions of like, okay, what else is there like Slack and Discord for collaborative sharing? Not knowing necessarily that Slack or Discord is the exact right thing or the best model we're looking for, but just starting in a place of like, how do I collect this information? Right. And so I'm getting some things back from that search that some of them are interesting. Like I'd never heard of Mattermost. So I was like, okay, well, I'll make a note of this to like look into Mattermost. And some of them are not really the thing that ACCA would want or need together, like Microsoft Teams, which isn't really the right format for folks in this kind of community, right? Because we're not necessarily like working together and having all of our stuff in that centralized place. And so, some of it was like, oh, okay, maybe that needs to be like streamlined or the question asked slightly differently and kind of looking at like, oh yeah, what are the right ways to kind of ask these questions? And can I ask for then with this AI to do some of that labor around like, oh yeah, make me a list of, different possibilities of tools. And a lot of the ones that came to mind for me, which like I'll talk about a little bit, and then I'm curious to get kind of thoughts, reflections, things that come up around this, are things kind of in that family of the Slacks, the Discords that aren't necessarily like a full, Microsoft Teamsy kind of platform, but do potentially also have like ways to streamline what notifications you are and aren't getting, and getting to pick kind of which like streams of information you're in. And it sounds like many of you have used or are using some kind of something like this. And um, but I'll kind of just lay out a couple of these examples. And often when I think about these types of communications, there's a lot of similarities in terms of, you have essentially these different like forum rooms and categories of, here's the room where we talk about this thing, and here's the room where we talk about this thing, and this is the place where announcements get made. And then individually as a user, you can choose, what am I getting notifications for? What am I not getting notifications for? Someone can direct message you and call, you specifically and say, hey, do you have something for this? Or I heard you talking about this the other day. Um, and depending on what your notifications are, you'll get notified or not. And so this, kind of model, I think, looks really similar in This is the Mattermost. And it almost looks kind of the same, right? There's these different channels that exist that have like different things you can put into different categories. There's like the actual, kind of main content place. You can pull individual threads out to like kind of specify and narrow in on communication. All of these you can share documents and information. And similar rocket.chat, essentially a lot of the same features, right? So there's started to be a lot more of, I think, these types of um, communication and sharing apps that like enable this type of communication with some of these specifications that aren't available in a just standard reply all email situation where, you then have to like scroll through and hunt everything that you want. And yeah, so it can be kind of an interesting thing to look at. And then similar, Flock is another one. Essentially a lot of the same features, right? Where you can have and set up these different rooms that could be all kinds of things, right? And it sounds like there maybe is a need for, a distinct channel or room. All the different apps call them different things. That is the like, yeah, share what are the skills that you have, or what are you an expert in? Or the maybe a channel that is the like, looking for someone to help with, provide, etc. And these kinds of different possibilities. And I'm curious, like with this, kind of with this conversation, because we're sort of doing this at like different meta layers, right? Of like, oh, yeah, what are the ways to think about what might work best for ACCA? Like, how do we sift through and get the information that uh, we like will guide what would actually work best for us? Like, how do we feel even thinking about this? What questions do we have? Which could be both like about, like, well, what are the differences between those then? Or how do we pick? Or like, is there something I'm not thinking about? Or like, how would we actually use this? Or would people actually use this? And yeah, I just want to kind of open conversation to those pieces and talk about that a little bit of like, what is coming up for folks? What are you thinking about kind of as we look at and think about the different possibilities and like the process of implementing something like this? And there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah, a survey to figure out who's using what already, potentially. Yeah, and are you kind of like with that, Jenny, are you thinking from the lens of like just sort of trying to like streamline or catch the thing that yeah, because you don't have to want to necessarily learn something new. Totally. Yeah, and maybe there is something that the majority of folks are using, potentially. Yeah, possible. Yeah, Kathy, jump on in.
Yeah, I think a survey is a great idea. One thing that I like to do is to be able to file and sort my information. So something that does that. I am involved in one group that uses Discord. It's on a computer I don't use that much. So I get notices on my phone, but can't access things. And they have a lot of channels on the Discord, but it's a little bit too much for, and every time someone has an emoji, there's a notice about it. So, but I do prefer ways to sort information. Creative City Network had listservs for a while.
Hmm.
It's a different system now.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know if anyone is using a listserv in the same way that they used to 5 years ago.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, will you say more when you say like sort and save, what that means to you? Like, do you mean just like being able to take that information and put it in your own like files on your own system, or just even like within whatever that platform is, being able to like kind of flag or demarcate things? Okay.
If there's a lot of different topics so that I could go to it. And I don't use Teams that much, even though a lot of my colleagues do, but they share information there, different places, and they know how to go access, how to find the files they want through them.
Hmm.
I just have lots of folders in my email. I'm primarily an email user, but that's because I work for a municipal government. So
Hmm.
that's where
Hmm.
most of my business is done. And then when there's things in other systems, that does not necessarily coincide with the work. If my job would be different because, you're talking to people who are their own businesses. So I would be in a different situation. And
But
I
it's,
also would say for myself, there are so many systems, and then sometimes I can't remember, well, what's this one again? And, for a while, everybody was using Slack,
mhm,
but then nobody kept up on it. So it's like, why
totally.
do we have this Slack? Nobody uses
Yes.
it. We just start email. And
Hmm.
then, something's Google Drive.
Yes, totally. Yeah. It's interesting too, because it's like there are so many tools now in a way that's like great and exciting in terms of like, oh, potential things that could be excellent, but that it also does make it harder to like have the immediate ease of like, oh, we'll all just use the tool that exists. Or in a world where there's only email, we are only using email. In a world where there's only Google Drive, we're only using Google Drive. But when there's all these things, it's like, oh, okay, well, how do we do that? And then not also, same like you said, where it's like, I've definitely worked with different teams and groups where it's like, Slack sounds like a great idea, right? Let's have this sort of organized place to have different channels and whatever. And then nothing happens there. And it's like figuring out, yeah, how do we actually make what we're using work and be.
Yes, I have
Mhm,
a project, a residency project, and initially we had set up Slack, but no one ever used it. So I
mhm,
just tell the people, even though they're often young, it's email. That's what you'll get from me. So
mhm.
anyway,
Yeah,
good conversation. Interesting to hear about the work people do. Thank you so much.
totally. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think, I'll say one more thing and then throw to you, Roger. Like, it makes me think about too, like kind of, and as Jenny was mentioning, that part of like at this point, if we were the ones in charge of figuring this out, or actually just a team where it's like, we are going to be the group that's kind of heading this up, we'd have more time to unfold this versus this like hour-long time together. But I think it's really interesting, right? We definitely want to come to these ideas of like, oh, yeah, how do we actually successfully implement whatever this is? And how do we make sure that the thing that like theoretically sounds good and useful is actually like meeting the needs, is usable, that folks know how to use it, that there are ideas and clarity about like, what do we use this for and not use this for? And do we have a date where we are formally kind of looking at, hey, is this working? And or do we need to make any shifts and changes so that it isn't just a thing that dies in technology tool, space. Yeah, totally. Yeah, Roger, go for it.
First of all, I wanted to say hi to Kathy. I haven't seen Kathy in like how many years? So I
Oh,
can't,
wow, years.
yeah, it's been like 12 years probably.
Oh, wow, a really long time.
So one of the things she brought up was that the ACCA as a group is quite eclectic. In other words, some of us are municipally focused. I'm more federally focused. Some of us are sort of individual organization focused.
Mhm.
And so I'm figuring we'll probably have some difficulty finding a sort of a platform or a product or an app that everyone can use, since we all have these different focuses. But I think I remember in the early days of like before the pandemic, every so often there'd be a social event somewhere. It was often in Toronto, occasionally in Ottawa or Vancouver, things like that. Um, and I'm just wondering if that kind of activity outside of the digital realm that, in a sense, connects to or in a sense recreates that community would work for this group. I don't know, but I think it's important to realize that we're all a group of really like individualistic, like business people, and so the finding that sweet spot where everybody's going to say, "Oh, I'll use this, and it won't be forgotten in 3 weeks." And hey, use email. That's what I use. That is really common for me. It's like people say, "Oh, we have this shiny thing," and then I say, "Okay, well, I'll try to figure out the shiny thing," and then they say, "But just send me email." Okay. So yeah, it won't be an easy, but it'd be an interesting thing to try and to find that space where we could share at a way that we like to share.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is spot on. And I think like a very, sort of in this meta way of like talking about this situation, like the ways that this also mirrors like this conversation and exploration around digital tools in our own individual work and the organizations that we are working within, more permanently not, et cetera. Um, of like, oh yeah, like what is the actual need here? And like, what are the ways to get that? And yeah, maybe part of that is just like, oh yeah, can we have some social events and like opportunities to connect? Maybe it's, and maybe it isn't the tool that is, something, of course, hopefully not one that just goes to die, but like, looking at like, what are the actual needs, the things that people really want out of that? And how can we facilitate that happening? It's like thinking about this even in my mind pops like, oh yeah, I wonder if there's like a unlisted page that's just for ACCA members where you all informally are like, here's who I am. Here are things I'm good at. Feel free to shoot me an email if you want, you know, to touch on any of these pieces of expertise, or I'm open to networking or whatever. And that's another way to exchange information, right? And there isn't necessarily like a right or a wrong way, but figuring out like what is the process of narrowing in on what we actually want out of this, exploring the possibilities, and then looking at implementation. How do we implement this most effectively? And then how are we ensuring that we have an evaluation adjustment period to kind of find the iterative adjustments to make something actually successful and work? Yeah, Jane, I see your hand. Go for it.
Hi, Lacey. I'm sorry I missed most of your things, but the
No
hospital
worries.
had me in its grips. So I
Mm,
am now home.
God.
But I just on this particular subject, there is a new website that's been created. And on that website, if it's not there now, it's about to be a page for exchange between consultants.
Cool.
Can we do this? Can I help you with that? Or I'm really good. We do social events, usually 2 or 3 times a year. But with all of the things that have been happening with the PCH grant and all the mentorships, et cetera,
Mhm.
that's fallen by the wayside. So we're going to do one probably in September. But the I hear everybody saying the same thing. There is so much out there, and some of us are not the younger generation anymore. I confess, and we don't necessarily assimilate easily
Mhm.
a new platform. Teams, I have no use for Teams whatsoever. It has never worked for me. I
Mhm.
will never use it. I
Mhm.
will always go back to Zoom. And I will also always go back to uh, using email, because that I know I'm safe with.
Totally.
I'm going to get an answer. Um, so that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with, the different age groups we're all in too, and our
Mhm.
experience level and what you're used to using. If it isn't broken, don't fix it, you know, type thing.
Mhm.
I mean, I've worked with one group which is trying to use Slack, and the president is getting uh, upset because nobody's using Slack. Well,
Mm.
none of us are connected to Slack, so we don't get the messages. But so there's all the bits that have to be put together, and who's going to do that? Is that kind of
Yes.
connectivity, which we don't seem to have that much of these days.
Mhm. Completely. Yeah. I mean, and I think this is such an important like part kind of this reflection of like, oh yeah, like all of these things that can stand in the way of a new tool. And not even that always implementing the new tool is the thing that's needed or the right thing, but that like there's so many things that can make it really hard to figure out how do we do this well and effectively, and how do we find each other in ways that work for everyone, align with folks' skill sets, needs, compatibilities, devices. Like there's so many different things. And I think like, it's kind of like we talked about, I think it was in the second one of like, no tool is going to solve a problem like on its own, and that it's figuring out like what are the kind of pain points, the problem for wanting to solve. Like not that there's like a problem here, but like, oh, I'd like to more easily pitch out a thing that I could use help with. Um and figuring out like, yeah, Slack can be great. Like I worked within a circus studio organization that used Slack and like used it, like, and it was amazing because it enabled such like ease and communication and like isolation in different conversations and different channels in a way that like was so much easier than just emails and trying to sort through that, and enabled quick exchange of information and all these things, right? And it can be awesome. And I've worked with teams who initiate Slack and never really use it, and then it's not going to be effective, right? And if it's not the right tool for a person or an individual or an organization, it's also not going to be effective that way. Yeah, so all of those different pieces. And I think it really speaks to me too, this piece of like when this is potentially implemented, if it is an external, I think, okay. Like if it is a potential, like a tool of some kind, like ensuring that it's like, okay, somebody who does know how to use this offers a 30-minute basic intro, navigation to this, and that's recorded and can be distributed. Or here's the video to get this information, these kinds of pieces, because I think there are so many ways to use things effectively and not effectively. Yeah. I'm curious, Jane, you mentioned the new website or the new page, I think, that's going to be for more of the exchange. Can you say more about that? Like, is there a forum-y kind of component where someone can write up like, hey, looking for something, and someone could respond on that page? Like, what does that look like?
The idea. It's not there yet, I don't think, but that was the concept.
Cool.
That if you had something to share amongst the membership, it could be posted like an RFP,
Mhm.
but it's not an RFP, obviously. It's a different conversation. But, people might find this interesting. So it becomes a kind of
Mhm.
online newsletter, which you can look at when you want and if you want. And if you want to join in a conversation about it, that capacity is there to do that.
Mhm.
But as I say, it's not up and functional
Totally.
at this point, as far as I know.
Mhm.
But it's in the work.
It's in the works. Cool. Can to chat, and I know you may not know yet since it's not like actually live, but if like I logged on and wrote something, can I set to receive notifications when there are posts, or is it more of a like kind of old style forum of like I have to actively choose to kind of go there to sort of scroll and peruse?
I believe there's notifications that will go out saying a new posting on this page, but to the membership only.
Totally. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing developing. I'm curious for folks in uh who are here right now, which I know we're a much smaller group, but like hearing about that possibility unfolding. Yeah. Thoughts, feelings, reflections, things that either like things you wonder about or things that you want to maybe put a note on of like, ooh, could it do this or would it do this or et cetera? Yeah. Jenny, go for it.
Yeah, and I think that would absolutely, sorry, there's background noise. Sorry, I think that would absolutely work, as long as there's push out, because as with the RFPs, we get a notice that there's an RFP state thing. I mean, I only go to the website if there's a reason to. So, but there again, again, as long as we want that information. Yeah, I think I've said enough. Sorry,
Mhm.
we'll see here.
No, totally. And no, in the background noise, actually, Zoom's doing a great job cutting it out. So I don't even know what it is, but I don't really hear it on my end. Yeah, totally. So that importance of notification. Yeah, other folks' thoughts, reflections, feelings. Yeah, go for it, Roger.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing I would certainly use. But the thing is, you can't sort of predictively set out how many times I'd use it in the next 6 months, but it might actually come up once where I would have the same situation where I'd say, oh, can somebody put me together a survey? There's other things that I would want to do. Sometimes I would think that I could probably get help from my fellow consultants rather than searching around for a
Mhm.
tutorial to figure something out. Perhaps it's more my style or my way of working, and perhaps I'm more of the old school, which isn't going to learn that much from a YouTube video. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
definitely something I would use.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that the need is very much there to exchange and share information with one another in various ways, and that there is like a process of, yeah, figuring out like, what does that look like? How's this working? How would we want to shift or change this? What might be different? For sure. Yeah, Jane.
Just a comment. There is a page on Facebook, which talks about interesting comments that are made about events within the arts community that are more politically oriented. And that's the kind of thing that I would like to see on the ACCA page. That it is, this is policy that is developing on such and such. What do you think about it? How is it going to affect your work? How is it going to affect my work? What is the
Mhm.
bigger picture? Or that there's events coming up like, I'm not too sure how many people on this call today were aware of a CHRC discussion that's going on over the last week, this week, and the next 2 weeks on EDI. Very interesting conversation and how it applies across the country, because this is
Mhm.
one of our main focuses now. So it's getting the conversations going between all of us to get more ideas, more thoughts, or I forgot about that, or I
Mhm.
didn't think about this or whatever. So it's basically getting conversations going in a space that's going to be beneficial to those of us who pay to be a member of ACCA.
Totally. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's like, as you're talking about that too, it makes me think about like, I think the ways that the world is so like magical in terms of the accessibility that the digital world offers us, and the fact that we can like work with people from all over and connect with people from all over and move around, and how we don't always have the communities where there is this type of sharing that maybe would have existed in a different time, when it was, you just saw your neighbors and the people in your community more often. And those were the people that were in your working world, your social world, all of these things. And um, what are the ways to like catch momentum around that? And I think about like, I've kind of mentioned some of these pieces too, but I always think about like with whatever it is, like what needs to happen to make implementation successful, right? Like who is responsible for this, which like, in this case has some clarity around this. But who's responsible for reviewing or evaluating and tracking usage? Like when is the date that we're going to have a formal evaluation, which doesn't have to mean like formal, but even just a like, okay, on this date, we're going to look at how many people are using this? Is it working? Are there things we need to change about it? Can we get feedback? How's that going to happen? What does that look like? Um, and then I think there's the individual piece of this too, with any tool that we use, whether that is a web page or it's integrating something different. This question of, okay, if I'm going to start using this, like, how do I want to use this tool? And what's also my timeline for evaluation of like, is this working? Is this not working? And, because I think it really is easy to try out things, which is like a good thing. But it's easy to sometimes, I think, lose those, like the check in about like, wait, is this tool really serving the functions that I wanted it to serve, or that I set out kind of hoping or intending that it would serve? Um, Setting out, how are we going to evaluate success about this? Know if it's going to working. How will we set users up for success and adaptation of this? And how do we also communicate to others who aren't here or in the other meetings that are happening, right? So kind of thinking about these like multi-layers that we're sort of exploring this topic. But I think there's a lot of value in being able to connect around even imagining what it is, right? Because as Jane's talking about that, like, other people may be like, oh yeah, like I definitely want to do more of that too. Cool. Now I can imagine this space as a place where we do that in a way that if it is just like, hey, folks who aren't here, there's this thing that exists now. It's going to be awesome that folks may not be kind of joined in on the vision of it. And so, yeah, so I think to me, it's like this as a kind of microcosm of these bigger kind of questions and the processes of when we're using and evaluating and exploring different digital tools, whatever they are, looking at these bigger questions around like what is working, what isn't working, like how do we know if something's working, how are we tracking that process? Yeah. Any last thoughts, reflections? I know the time goes really quickly, but um, I feel like it's really valuable to just even like both kind of come away with some ideas about like what might exist and might be most useful, but to also get kind of the reps and the processes and talking out and talking through, what does it look like to evaluate a tool that might exist and to explore possibilities and look at them overall. So I definitely appreciate that with you all today. And yeah, I'm curious if you'll have any other thoughts, reflections, things you want to note as we're finding the wrap time.
I just want to thank you, Lacey, for all you've done because I've been reading the reports. I haven't had the time to listen to the ones that are online yet, but it's been an amazing eye opener from what I can understand. And your knowledge and experience has really just opened our eyes, I'm sure, certainly mine. And I would look forward to possibly bringing you back for other sessions
Mhm.
in the future because I think it would
For
be very
sure.
beneficial to our membership to be able to say, okay, we're going to talk about this. Let's get Lacey.
Mhm. Mhm. Totally. Yeah, reach out anytime. I definitely like all of this stuff and kind of anything in this world of communication and organizations and looking at it from these kind of multi angles of, nervous system and understanding how do we work as people and what can we understand about how the brain works that we can apply it as we're trying to do the work things that we're looking to do. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been lovely to be with all of you and get to spend time together. And I did paste again the YouTube link in the chat box. If you did miss any of them, you can find those there as well. And yeah, would love to work with you all again for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Lovely to be with y'all. And fun to see the 12-year connection time between Kathy and Rosie. I'm like, oh, that's so fun that y'all got to see each other after 12 years. That's great. Awesome. Y'all have a great rest of your day.